Start. Welcome to the podcast. What does it truly mean to prepare students for a future we can barely predict? How do we ensure that every child, regardless of the background, has a real shot at that future? Today, we are exploring these critical questions with a leader who lives with them every day. We are honored to have Dr. Leslie Torres-Rodriguez, Superintendent of Hartford Public School in Connecticut. Dr. Torres isn't just a leader at Hartford, she's a product of the schools she now leads. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We would love to start with your own extremely powerful journey from being a student to a superintendent. And the reason I call it powerful is because you also did social work and like a social activist in the middle before becoming principal and moving on to a superintendency role. So, how was this journey for you like?
Yes, not I guess a non-traditional journey, but I will say it did start like many uh, of our students' journeys. And by that I mean that I was born in Puerto Rico and I came to Connecticut, to Hartford actually, the city of Hartford at the age of 9 as a multilingual learner in a space that felt quite foreign to me in terms of learning and language and the environment that I was in. And as I went through schooling, I had many positive experiences, and there were times in which I did not feel connected to the learning, to people, and that specifically felt inquisitive for me as to why some of my peers were meeting success at times and why I wasn't, and vice versa. And so it wasn't until high school that I felt most disconnected, and I couldn't understand what I was learning and the relationship to the rest of my life, if you will, right? So it just felt like it was what we call technical learning, and I couldn't really understand the so what behind it. So I always questioned, why are we learning this? And fast forward, I did always want to be an educator. And sure enough, I set off to do that in college. And what happened is that quite frankly, I ran out of money, didn't have enough scholarship money. And halfway through my undergraduate, I thought, well, I'm going to have to stop or pause until I can, work some more, save a little money, and come back to school. And it just so happened that I had met a professor in a community organizing event. I was always drawn to advocacy and working with community. And this professor saw me one time and said, I always see you at these community organizing events advocating for access and opportunity. What's your story? So we ended up talking, and I said, I'm making a decision to pause. I really can't afford to continue in college. And the professor said to me that at that moment, the local University of Connecticut had scholarships for particularly Latino and Black educators, people that were interested in social work. I had not thought about social worker before. However, I knew that there was something that could allow me to have access back in so that I could continue my studies. And I shifted. I shifted and I pivoted. I took a pivot and went from education and my dream of teaching to social work. I will say also that I never let go of my passion for wanting to be an educator. That's why I spent 7 years at the local community college teaching social and behavioral sciences. And it was there that I realized that I needed to impact systems. And I went into my doctorate in my master's in social work and then my doctorate in educational leadership and went into school administration, school leadership, and the rest, if you will, right, is history into an assistant principal, and then continued there. And all throughout, there has been a very intentional disposition towards making sure that I understand. and respond to the conditions that have to be true, yes, for our students, but also for our educators, also for the community-based providers that support, at least in a community like the one that I serve, to work with our families so that we're all trying to work connected in a way that meets the needs, the various needs of our students. So that's a long way of answering your question as to the journey, but it's grounded in the fact that the system didn't always see me. The system uh, did have educators that I was deeply connected to, but not always. And I know that that is still true for us in our system and in other systems. And so, hence why I'm so excited to have this conversation about the future of education, because I do think there is a lot of opportunity.
I love the fact that what you said, the system still doesn't see all of us, because I agree with you on that. I think system is built for it to function, and it does function. Don't get me wrong, there is great products and we are still products of it and it works, but it doesn't enables everyone. It enables the majority and it works for few, but when we're looking at future ready, we want better for what the next generation of kids to have that what we did not. And I think that's where it comes from, that's where it stems down. What is how we look at from the next lens, right? Like who are the kids who are coming in right now? What will these students feel when they graduate, when they are going to college or when they are looking at jobs? And that's my first real take, right? Like, what's the biggest fundamentally misunderstood thing about a student who's coming in today or to become future ready that is not in the open and not everyone's taking a look at it? What is that something which is everyone should just have a conversation about?
Yeah, that question makes me think about first the science of learning,
Yeah,
the research that exists, and also neuroscience, right? That tells us about how we should be designing schools and honestly how it hasn't gone well historically, right? For decades, I think as it relates to the science of learning and the research, like we have known more than we have applied. We know that the science of learning, and more recently, breakthroughs in neuroscience have given us, I think, a rich understanding of how humans, young people, develop, how they process information, and how uh, they engage meaningfully or not in learning. And yet, right, our systems have remained rooted in those outdated structures. The one size fits all pacing, the passive learning models, the very rigid schedules, and environments that I think still often ignore the psychosocial, emotional development needs of students. And are students learning? Those that have been in the seats and those that are coming in, their
yeah,
learning is not linear. Their learning actually, it's relational and it's messy. And it happens in environments of trust where stress is low. I'm not saying stress can't exist and shouldn't exist, right? That's how we all grow. But it also it can't be high stress all the time. There has to be curiosity. The curiosity has to be very, very high. And the students coming in, I think we have to be aware that um, there's a thing called a brain that is a social organ, and it wires and rewires through interaction, through feedback and relevance. And designing schools and programs around compliance and standardization versus connection and creativity is what we have to think about as we think about the students that are coming in. I am excited that I think it's gonna start to change. Um, and I'm excited that we're finally talking more about brain development and um, all these other elements that get us to think about the role of executive function and identity and how to be aware of, of our emotionality. All, by the way, skills and knowledge that are durable and are necessary in any world of work that our young people will be entering.
I've And just adding to it, I think we forget that it's social beings is what we call human beings, because we were always in tribes and we always had interactions that would take us forward. And trying to put us in boxes and cookie cutters is not what's needed. It needs everyone has their own way of learning. Everyone has their own way to respond to what inputs come in and how is the output that comes out. And I believe, and I think you mentioned durable skills, is that, and this is what I think, and I would love to hear your viewpoint, specifically with AI coming in and the whole Silicon Valley and everyone else and jobs being lost. Till now, jobs were being lost in blue collar workforce. All industrial revolution, everything else was happening towards blue collar. This is the first time white collar workforce is experiencing a job cut through technological changes. And the only skill set that makes us humans are the durable skill sets. So, how do we translate that in education? How are you looking to translate that to your district, to bringing it to schools? How did you do it prior to the whole thing? And just your view on the same. And do you agree with me on this?
I do agree with you. I think that we haven't created enough space and dedicated enough time to thinking about this revolution and the role, for example, that artificial intelligence, uh, intelligence will play in future-proofing education, and nor have we thought about how it will affect student learning. We already know it's reshaping the world that our students, right, are stepping into, and we can't afford to continue to lag behind. And it starts with acknowledging that the technology, AI, is not going to replace teachers with algorithms, but it is a tool for personalization, I think also creativity and access, right? To your point earlier around not putting everyone in the same box, think about it. You know, AI as a resource can tailor learning pathways to meet students where they are, wholehearted, totally. It can provide real-time feedback. It can adopt content for someone like myself that was, learning English as their second language. It can help make data-informed decisions to perhaps close some of the gaps faster. I'm not saying that we have to ignore the ethicality behind it. Never will I say that. But and I do think it has to be approached with care. But I think if we are ethical and transparent and most certainly student-centered, and we take care in how we create conditions for the adults to learn, not just using the tools, but also how to critically evaluate the power.
Yeah.
I think we can get to a point where, yes, we provide the student the digital literacy that we know students need, the AI literacy, right? The ability to understand how these systems work and how they impact their lives and how they can also shape their lives for good. I think if done well, we get back to what we were talking about earlier. Can it free can it free up time for a deeper human connection in classrooms? Can it support educators to focus more on mentorship and critical dialogue and that project-based learning, the kinds of things that the science of learning has told us for a few decades now, and that our young people tell us, at least they tell me over and over and over again. And by the way, the kinds of things that no algorithm, I don't think, can replicate. So, so it's not a future of automating learning. I actually think it's about amplifying the brilliance and the human potential that we have all across our schools.
Love it. I think that's what
Did I answer your question?
you
I
did.
hope I
You
answered your
did.
question.
You did. Yeah, yeah. And just the fact that amplifying human potential, right? Like just taking that. And I think that's the key for future readiness. And I'm now going to ask you this, right? Like, how do you think of future-proof education? You've answered to me in three different ways. I'm going to directly put this question across and make you put a structure to it. If you could, if a kid's joining in today, what is a future-proof education looks like to them, and how will they be ready to enter the world 15 years from now once they leave the school?
I would say a couple things. Future proofing education uh, means that our students will be equipped with skills that transcend specific content and actually specific technologies as well. Um, again, it's not just about coding or AI literacy. And by the way, I am not minimizing those. I think we need to, we're a little behind on that. Um, but it's also about adaptability. It's about collaboration. It's about resilience. It's about ethical reasoning, critical thinking. Those are the skills. Those are the skills that transcend any any technology and can go across jobs that we know as we look into the future, our future adults are going to go across many jobs, right? It's not like no longer is it that they're going to spend the entire work life in one domain. And so future proofing means that tending to those foundational essential skills, it also means rethinking the way we assess and measure what truly, truly matters. Are we recognizing and elevating competencies like the ones I mentioned, or like conflict resolution, um, how you regulate your emotions, your awareness of yourself, your others, and the context in which you're in, uh, teamwork, right? It means also future proofing, creating learning environments that reflect the realities of our students' lives, where digital tools are not just for consumption, but also for creation and and connection. I think that um, future proofing also takes into account that when students learn how to express themselves, listen to others, and collaborate, even if that's done through a screen, we are preparing them for a future that demands, yes, the technical skills, but what I call human fluency. And in a world which with such rapid change, those skills must be the backdrop and the foundation.
And
Something else that I'm thinking about is right in my role, um, and as a systems thinker, is that like we can't just look at the output. We have to think about what are the conditions that are going to make that possible.
yeah,
And yes, we were talking about the student experience, but I would also think about there's no future-proofing education without talking about the people
The team.
who make learning possible every day, right? Our educators, our school leaders. And the truth is that we are at a crossroads, um, burnout, perhaps disillusionment, and in some communities, underinvestment. Those contribute to educators wanting to or not wanting to remain in the profession. And we of course need to retain, we also have to empower our educators to reimagine conditions, yes, for students, but also for their work.
Yeah.
And so those skills that I talked about as needing to be true for students, I think also have to be true for adults, right? Needing space for collaboration and reflection and permission and even encouragement to try new things without fear of of failure. And so that requires that we look at leadership differently. Right? Future ready leaders that aren't that yes are good operational managers and builders of cultures and shapers of systems. So to keep adults in it, so we have to then think about, okay, how do we support their well-being, their creativity, their learning?
So
So
we take
lots
human.
of the systems.
Yeah, so we're taking human fluency from students to teachers and understanding how it should function for both of them, because we can't impact students without impacting the educators. And if educators are standing way behind, and that happened, I think when we look at social media, I think our educators were not equipped to deal with what social media brought, and every student was using it, and they did not have the guardrails for, because educators did not come on it for such a long time. They didn't even realize what the student was facing. And and as technology changes, as life experience changes, you want adults to be there first so that they can help the kids out, not the other way around. And I think our students are way smarter, way more resourceful in figuring those nuances out than adults are. We are stuck in our ways. And lifelong learners is a term which we, like, I love to use, is how we want to build all our kids.
Yes, I that I also appreciate um, lifelong learning. It's actually continuous learning is one of my top five values. And so the piece there around lifelong learning is that there has to be an element of agency of the learner.
100%.
And so that requires being explicit about the process of learning and by extension at the adults, the process of teaching so that we can understand the conditions, the foundational skills for at some point the student to be an agent of their learning.
And and I have a very different question now to ask, right? Like, because we're looking at redesigning these systems, but we are also looking at a time when the enrollments are decreasing in most districts. There's a staff shortage. It's changing everything fast, and the budgets are low. So how do we implement all of this? Like, where do we start? Where are you starting? Like,
I will tell you that I there's like you know how when you're sitting and you're like uncomfortable in your seat. Well, I've been uncomfortable in the seat in the sense that um, the yes, the experience, the design, the learning design for students has to change. But I also think it has to change for the adults, like I said earlier. And so a starting point is small starting points where I'll give you an example. We created the Innovation Network, a group of schools that are looking at how can they do things differently. And by the way, differently doesn't mean something completely new. It is how can they get better at some of the things that we know are foundationally necessary, like early literacy, for example. And so creating opportunities for educators to learn from one another, not just in their school, but across schools. That is one way that we have started. Another way that we've started, and this is a leadership move, is making it okay to have conversations about new technologies, for example, that we are not yet proficient in. Again, creating a safe space to say, I don't know about this AI thing. And can we create opportunities for us to be explorers, and for that to be okay? The other way that we should begin is there is a policy implication to all of this. You talked about decreasing enrollment, and with decreasing enrollment means decreasing revenue. And so, what are the policy conditions that have to exist for us to think about? We can't continue to want to do all of it in the same way, even from the perspective of the same funding structure. And so it's looking at the system from so many different angles and saying, okay, so which area are we going to try to focus in on? Because complex education systems are complex systems, right? You can't transform everything in at one time. And so being really careful about the one, two, maybe three things that you can kind of dig in, and then begin to build capacity for exploration and for experimentation. And I know that's that word itself doesn't land well at times in education,
Yeah.
but the opposite of not being curious, the opposite of not leaning in, the opposite of not designing differently is getting exactly what we have been getting because we stay doing the same thing. That has not and will not continue to work.
And you use the word experimentation, and I've spoken to enough school leaders and like district superintendents to know they don't like experimentation because experimentation means that the result might not always be in what you want it to be. Everyone wants a proven models that work. Everyone wants everything to be data centric. Everything should have always worked. If everything always worked, then why would there be a new change? Why would there be a new curriculum? Why would there be new ideas, right? Like you need to try a few different things because to figure out if that works. We can do it in a controlled environment. We can do it for one class. We can do it for one school, not for the whole district. But we can do it small. We don't have to implement it for the whole, the 40 million kids in the education system. We can do it for 100 kids, but we need to experiment to figure out what works and what doesn't.
Yeah, that's the tension that I've always felt and have grappled with. And maybe that's the social worker in me where, you know, how could you not think about doing things differently, or at the very least asking, hey, let's pause, let's reflect. Is it working? Am I giving it all that I'm giving it? Should I be doing it differently? Should we be thinking about it differently? Um, and and it's almost um, nonsensical to me at times when I think about, so we're in the business of teaching and learning essentially, and that means exploring when there's the productive struggle, right? The sweet spot that we know is the turn that could be the turning point, but we never get far enough. But we want our students to get there, but yet we don't create conditions for all of the elements in the system to do the same. And I agree with you. I am not saying let's do it at scale, but how do we think that big breakthroughs in society have happened. They haven't happened because someone said, no, we're going to guard what we're doing and we're going to stick to the plan and keep doing it the same way. On the contrary, they've either happened by mistake, accidentally, big breakthroughs, or by continuously designing, prototyping, and trying again and again and again. And it's time. It's time.
And can you give me an example of something which you've experimented and you really liked, which others can follow? Because I think a lot of school leaders would be interested to see what you've done on this.
I can, and that could be in so many different ways. Because I think what's important here is that there is a science to uh, exploring ways, different ways of doing things,
Yeah.
right? There is a science of improvement. There's a science behind design. And there's a science in doing that in inclusive ways, which, by the way, I think accelerates the progress. Um, so I'll share an example of when we knew early on during my tenure that we needed to redesign the system. And because of lower enrollment, because of um, uh, financial sustainability challenges, because of student disengagement, because of a lot of different things. And we thought, okay, so here's an opportunity. Now, one way is we engaged our community very deeply, intentionally, and intently to really understand what and how they were, what they thought about the system, how they were experiencing the system, whether it was the student, the educator, the family, the community partner. And we set off to redesign the system. Yes, it resulted in 20% closures in schools, and it also allowed opportunity for new programmings, new ways of teachers to feel supported, like collaborative time for teachers in the schedules, like student support and success centers. And so all of those innovations happened as a result of us pausing, reflecting on what truly is working, what are our aspirations, and then what conditions need to be true, whether it was relative to resource equity in the budget, whether it was relative to curricula that we did not have, whether it was supporting teachers differently. In all of those spaces, there was innovation. It required us to learn something new, to reshape structures, to use tools, data tools, for examples, differently. And it also required us to lean in, ask questions, sometimes just not say anything and just really listen. And most importantly, and allowed us to co-create with others. So those are some examples of how we have done the exploration, if you will. But in none of those, it has been that it was completely disrupt a system. While that might work, some systems are not designed to withstand, if you will, such quick, um, scaled change. So I say that we've done it in several different ways, but the foundational recurring moves have been leverage some of the data, both quantitative data, but also getting out and really close to those that will be impacting or that we know are not having the experience that they should, whether that be our students or our educators or our families, and creating those opportunities for reimagining together, doing it together, and making sure that we're always stay grounded on outcomes for students. Um, but it has looked and perhaps felt differently depending on, for example, the school context, which is something else that I always um, would add when I get the question that you're asking, how have you done it? What things have you done? There were some recurring moves, and those also either felt, sounded, or maybe looked a little bit differently given the context and the needs of a specific school community, which I think is important in this larger, broader situation that we in education find us in, right? To not assume that it worked in place A, let's completely replicate and do the same in place B.
I hear you. I hear you to design for each system independently rather than just cut, copy, paste so that you can add changes as you go by rather than rather than completely derailing the system and nothing works. It's better to make smaller changes and make things that work.
Yeah, and I understand that. Um, that also means that time, right? That also makes me uncomfortable in my seat to think about, wow, um, we still have many areas in which, right, we have to improve. And at the same time, I also see I remain so hopeful and excited because I also know that it is in our classrooms all over uh, the country and beyond that the answers are located in our students and our educators. We have to create the conditions for that to come alive.
And I agree with you. I think it's quite wonderful that I think almost all our answers are with the students of today. And that's what we're building the world for tomorrow. So students of today is where we're looking at. And that gives me a very different question to ask. I would, and it's a hypothetical journey. I'm giving you a magic wand. You have
Ooh,
unlimited supply of budgets, so there's no budget constraint. If you could do two changes in your district right now, what would those two changes be?
wow, no, no constraints. Students would not be in school, well, depending on the age, but particularly our older students would not be in school from 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning to 2:30 in the afternoon. Um, it would be a much more fluid experience, and half of their day would be out in the real world and not constrained to a school building. Um, and I would also say the experience for the educator, that it would be that we could design a system in which our educators, the adults, also have different entry points and experiences, right? That we would have an entry point for um, the the student teacher that we would that is also interdependent with the teacher that is skilled and that has very specific not just content but pedagogical expertise, and that there's opportunity for those two, the student teacher, for example, and the expert, if you will, to work closely together and determine ways to personalize the instruction for students. And you might say, well, Leslie, you're not describing anything, flashy. yes, and um, I think there's still opportunity for us to get better at the things that are in front of us.
Yeah. Uh, the only thing which I saw you light up was that there were no constraints. I understand how much difficult it is to work under those constraints and how difficult it becomes to take those calls because you have to prioritize. Not everything can be done. And and this is and I'm going to end this podcast with one major thing is we asked all our previous podcasters to give us a question for the next one. And the last one gave me a very interesting question to ask the current school leader was that if there's one problem you wish AI could magically solve for you, what would that be?
Mm. I would say that is such a good question. Um, I'm trying to see, is it at the teacher level that I say? Is it at the student level that I say? Um, it would be the personalized application of their learning. We students learn differently and at different paces. And so getting at the personalization for the student and doing it in a way in which I keep going back to the science of learning. There that there is an interaction in which that ultimately results in students being able to critically consume information and be authors and agents of their learning. And I know you're probably thinking, well, if AI is in it, then the student is not driving it. But I actually think that it can um, help us get better at students, yes, building foundational skills, but ultimately being critical consumers of not just information, but information that comes in so many forms, right? Whether it's through a relational information exchange, whether it is, an academic information exchange, whatever it is, ultimately, it's that agency and that autonomy so that students can contextualize, make meaning, and then be able to do the same in their personal lives, at work, in society.
I think
I
I
probably gave you a more philosophical answer, but
no, I think it's the fact that you said that personalized learning and the application layer. I think we underestimate that how much is still it's garbage in, garbage out. It's basically how much we feed the AI for us to give us back. So essentially, we ourselves are driving the learning and giving the students the guardrails plus understanding of how they can do that without overtly relying on the social aspect. Because I like coming back to the first thing we discussed, like I think social beings and societal beings and relationships are still the most critical piece. But
foundation.
foundational has to be there, the human skills. Then we can discuss how we can drive learning. Human should not be replaced by AI as a friend, which is unfortunately happening with AI right now. And those are the things which most teachers should be aware of, is how we put it.
Yeah, it's fascinating times. Um, both from a cautionary perspective and then relative to the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. For all our users who would want to reach out to you, what would be the best way? LinkedIn, email?
Yeah, LinkedIn, that would be great.
Amazing. Thanks a lot. And it was
You're
absolutely
very welcome. It was so good to reconnect.
same here.